I'm Jim Hayes, the father who paid for his daughter's wedding, even after she told the world I was dead. I stood at the edge of her ceremony, uninvited, watching another man walk her down the aisle. The same wedding I'd funded down to the last flower. When the bills came and her new family pretended I didn't exist, I paid them anyway. Not for her approval, not for pity, but because a man's word should outlive his reputation. The world called me a fool, then a hero. But what they didn't see was the quiet truth beneath the headlines. How love can break you, how dignity can cost everything, and how forgiveness doesn't come in words, but in work. This is the story of how I lost my daughter to pride, and how she found her way back, not through apology, but through the dirt, sweat, and silence where real redemption grows. The sun spilled over the vineyard like a scene painted for someone else's joy. Gold light filtered through white silk canopies, glinting off champagne glasses and camera lenses. Laughter moved through the air like wind through tall grass, warm, rehearsed, detached. I stood at the edge of it all, half hidden behind an ornamental maple tree, the same way I used to stand at the back of Victoria's dance recitals when I couldn't get off work in time. My daughter's wedding, and I wasn't invited. But I'd paid for every flower, every glass, every rented chair aligned so precisely in rows of 20. I adjusted my tie, though no one would notice. The fabric of my jacket itched where sweat had gathered beneath it. The program I'd taken from the usher's table, unnoticed in the chaos, trembled in my hand. The union of Victoria and Hayes and Preston Whitmore III. Except, there it was, printed in elegant gold lettering under the words, given in marriage by Charles Whitmore Sr. Not Jim Hayes. Not me. A murmur rolled through the guests as the string quartet began its soft ascent into Canon in D. Everyone turned their heads toward the path lined with white roses. And there she was, Victoria, my little girl, or the woman who used to be her. She glided down the aisle in a gown that shimmered like the surface of the river we used to skip stones across. Her veil was pinned with pearls, her smile steady and photogenic. But I saw the tightness in her jaw, the shallow breath she took before stepping forward. Nerves, maybe, or something deeper. When she reached the altar, she turned, not to me, but to the man at her side. Charles Whitmore Sr. towered over her, silver-haired and perfectly tanned. A patriarch in every sense of the word. He kissed her cheek and said something I couldn't hear. She smiled, radiant, grateful his. And in that moment, it wasn't the applause that hurt. It was the silence inside me. The officiant began his practiced lines, but I couldn't hear them. I watched instead as Victoria stole a glance toward the crowd, scanning faces she didn't expect to find mine among. When her gaze brushed past me for the briefest second, something flickered there. Recognition, guilt maybe, or fear that I had actually come. Then she turned away. The ceremony blurred after that. I saw mouths moving, tears brushed away, vows spoken into the crisp autumn air. I caught only fragments: honor, forever, love. All the words we say when we believe the future is a promise instead of a gamble. When the applause came, it burned. It wasn't just for her. It was for the story she'd rewritten, one where I no longer existed. I left before the toast began, before the dance floor filled, before my presence could become a scandal whispered between champagne sips. No one noticed. No one stopped me. The gravel crunched under my shoes as I crossed the parking lot, passing the line of luxury cars and valets in pressed uniforms. I opened the door of my aging pickup and sat for a moment, staring at the folded invoices tucked into my jacket pocket. $500,000 in costs, still unpaid. My company's name stamped on every contract. Hayes Construction and Supply. The vineyard, the caterers, the band, even the custom monogram napkins. Victoria had called me months ago, her voice trembling but sweet. Dad, it would mean the world if you could help with the arrangements. Preston's family is traditional. They want everything perfect. I had said yes before she finished the sentence. Because that's what fathers do. Now, as laughter drifted from the distance, I wondered if she'd rehearsed this too, the omission, the lie, the convenient death of a man she once called her hero. I started the truck. The engine coughed like an old smoker before finding its rhythm. The road ahead shimmered in the setting sun, a golden river leading nowhere in particular. In the rearview mirror, the vineyard receded until it became nothing but color, all the beauty money could buy, and none of the warmth love should bring. When I reached the main road, I slowed just enough to glance at the wedding sign propped against a stone gate. Welcome to the union of Victoria and Preston, a love story for the ages. A love story maybe, but not ours. I pulled the invoices from my pocket and set them on the passenger seat. My thumb traced the embossed names, vendors I knew personally, people I'd worked with for decades. Men and women who trusted that Jim Hayes always kept his word. And for a long while, I sat there, the weight of that trust pressing harder than the betrayal. From the distance, faint fireworks began to bloom against the twilight sky, bursts of red and silver, a celebration of a fairy tale built on erasure. I didn't stay to watch. As I drove away, I could still hear the faint echo of the officiant's final words, carried on the wind. What God has joined together. But I knew better. Some things weren't joined by God. They were bought, polished, and displayed. And sometimes they came with a bill that no one else intended to pay. By the time I reached the edge of town, the laughter had faded into static. I turned onto the narrow road leading home, to the quiet house where her childhood drawings still hung in the hallway, where her empty bedroom still smelled faintly of lilac shampoo. I parked in the dark, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. Somewhere inside the house, the answering machine blinked red, one unheard message waiting. Probably another contractor asking for payment, or maybe a friend reminding me I shouldn't have gone. But I didn't move. I just sat there, eyes fixed on the invoices spread across the seat beside me. The music from the wedding still echoed faintly in my memory, a melody meant for her new beginning. For me, it was the sound of an ending. The house was too quiet. It had been for years, but that night the silence felt personal, like it was mocking me. The wedding suit still clung to me like a costume I'd forgotten to take off. I poured a glass of whiskey and sat at the kitchen table. The invoices spread in a messy fan across the wood. Each line item looked like an accusation. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Somewhere in the house, the old pipes groaned. Ordinary sounds, but they felt louder now, as if the walls wanted to fill the space she'd left behind. I stared at the faded crayon drawings pinned to the refrigerator door. One was of me, or what a 6-year-old thought her dad looked like. Stick arms, square jaw, and a big red heart on my chest. Daddy the Builder, she'd written at the top in clumsy letters. Another was from her high school graduation, the one where she insisted I take the photos. "You're the only one who makes me look brave," she'd said then. I remembered her eyes, that same mix of pride and innocence that made me believe I hadn't failed completely as a father. Now those same eyes had looked through me at her wedding like I was a ghost. The phone rang. I didn't move at first, hoping it would stop. But it didn't. So I answered. "Jim," came the voice, smooth, controlled, and heavy with the kind of authority only bitterness could age. "Margaret, my ex-wife. I heard you showed up today," she said. No greeting, no hesitation. "I just wanted to see her," I replied quietly. "You shouldn't have," she said. "It wasn't your place." I almost laughed. "My place? I paid for half of it, Margaret. The dress, the venue, the—" "Don't," she cut in sharply. "Don't turn this into a scene. You promised you wouldn't embarrass Victoria." Embarrass her. The word lodged somewhere in my chest. "By existing?" I asked. "She's worked hard to fit into that world," Margaret continued, her tone brittle. "The Whitmores are particular. They have expectations." I let out a slow breath. "And those expectations include pretending her real father is dead." There was silence on the line, the kind that stretches just long enough to confirm every suspicion you wish wasn't true. "They see you as complicated," she said finally. "You're not easy to explain, Jim. The business, the bankruptcy scare, your reputation." "My reputation?" I said, voice rising. "I built everything she's ever had. Every school she went to, every bill that got paid, every damn piano lesson. But that doesn't fit their story, does it? Please, Margaret said softly, like she was trying to keep the peace in a house already burning. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I stared at the empty chair across from me, the one Victoria used to sit in when she'd tell me about the boys at school or the books she loved. The same chair she'd sat in the night she told me about Preston Whitmore. He's different, Dad, she'd said, smiling shyly. He listens. And I had believed her. Because I wanted to. Now the only thing I could hear in Margaret's voice was exhaustion. Or maybe guilt. She's young, she said finally. She wants to belong somewhere. You know what that's like. Yeah, I said, though my throat ached. I used to think I did. When the line went dead, I just sat there. The ice in my glass had melted into nothing. I stood, walked to the window, and looked out over the quiet street. The porch light flickered, catching the reflection of the old mailbox at the end of the drive. The name haze was fading, the paint chipped and weathered by years of neglect. Maybe it was fitting. I picked up one of the invoices from the table, the florist's, and turned it over. A handwritten note in the corner caught my eye. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Your daughter is lucky to have such a generous father. The kind of note people write when they still believe the world runs on gratitude. I wanted to crumple it, but my hand wouldn't move. Instead, I tucked it into my wallet, proof, maybe, that someone still remembered what I was supposed to be. The rest of the night passed in fragments, the tick of the clock, the smell of whiskey, the memory of her laughter echoing from years that now felt like a different life. By dawn, the kitchen looked like a crime scene, empty bottles, open envelopes, evidence of something gone wrong. I stared at my reflection in the window, the gray creeping into my beard, the lines around my eyes carved deeper by sleeplessness. Somewhere between that reflection and the quiet, it hit me. It wasn't just that my daughter had outgrown me. She'd rewritten me, erased the parts that didn't fit her new story. I wasn't the father who built her dollhouse, or the man who stayed up all night fixing her first car when it broke down the week before prom. I wasn't the guy who sat front row at every school play, pretending not to cry when she nailed her lines. I was a liability, a shadow, a mistake to be edited out. When the sun rose, I gathered the invoices and stacked them neatly, one on top of the other. Then I placed them in a folder and wrote her name on the front in clean block letters, Victoria. It wasn't anger that filled me then. It was something quieter, heavier, the kind of ache that doesn't burn, just settles deep in the bones. I went to her old room, opened the door, and stood there a long time. The walls were still painted the pale blue she'd chosen when she was 12. The bed was made, untouched since the day she packed for college. On the nightstand sat a framed photo, the two of us at a construction site, hard hats crooked, faces covered in dust. She'd written on the frame, me and my hero. I touched the glass. The reflection blurred. She doesn't need a hero anymore, I said aloud, to no one. And for the first time, I realized she wasn't the only one who had to let go of who she used to be. 2 weeks passed before the first one arrived. A thick white envelope with my company's logo printed neatly in the corner, a cruel little irony, since I already knew what it would contain. I slit it open with a penknife and shook out the papers. Invoice number 14782, the Belhist Vineyard. Outstanding balance, $72,460. Due immediately. I stared at the number until it blurred. I remembered the vineyard manager shaking my hand the day I booked it, telling me, "Your daughter's wedding will be one for the ages." He hadn't been wrong, just not in the way he'd meant. By Friday, the second envelope came. Then a third. By the end of the following week, the kitchen table was buried beneath them. Catering, floral design, photography, transportation, even the string quartet that played canon in D while I stood in the shadows. Each stamped with the same bold red word, past due. When I added up the totals, my stomach turned. $511,230.64. Every contract bore the same signature line. Guarantor James R. Hayes. Me. I picked up the phone and dialed the number Victoria had used the last time she called, 6 months before the wedding. It went straight to an automated message. The number you've dialed has been disconnected. I tried her mother's number next. Straight to voicemail. Finally, I dialed the Whitmore estate. A woman answered, her tone brisk, professional, and as cold as the marble floors I imagined under her heels. Whitmore residence. How may I direct your call? This is Jim Hayes, I said. I'm trying to reach Victoria Whitmore. It's regarding some. Who, sir? Victoria. My daughter. Mrs. Preston Whitmore. There was a pause long enough for me to hear the faint hum of classical music in the background. Then, Mr. Hayes, she said carefully, I believe there's been some misunderstanding. I don't think so, I said. Your family's wedding vendors are sending the bills to me. Another pause. Sir, according to our records, Mr. Hayes is deceased. I almost laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that startled even me. I assure you I'm not. I'm sorry, sir, she said, voice tightening. But we have no record of anyone by that name connected to the Whitmore family. The line clicked dead before I could respond. For a long time, I just sat there, the receiver pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone, the mechanical heartbeat of a world that had already buried me. That night, I pulled out the old filing box where I kept every contract, every check stub, every note Victoria had sent during the planning. My handwriting, her initials, payment promises. Each page another piece of evidence that I hadn't imagined the last year. I called the vineyard manager. He answered on the second ring. Mr. Hayes, good to hear from you. I assume payment's on the way. I thought the Whitmores handled their portion already, I said. A beat of silence. They told us you were handling everything, per the guarantor clause. It's standard practice. You signed it yourself. He wasn't wrong. I remembered the day. I'd been on a job site when Victoria called. She said they needed my signature to confirm a formality. She sounded rushed, excited, hopeful. I didn't read the fine print. I just signed and scanned it back between meetings. I hung up and stared at the wall until the edges of the room felt like they were closing in. The next morning, I drove to the florist shop, a small, family-run business downtown. The owner, Elise, met me with a hesitant smile. She'd done the arrangements for Victoria's childhood birthdays. Jim, she said softly, we didn't want to bother you. We thought maybe something happened. Something did, I said. Her eyes dropped to the ledger in her hands. We sent the invoice to the Whitmore estate, but their assistant told us you'd passed away. We didn't know what to think. I forced a smile, though it probably looked more like a grimace. Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. Elise laughed weakly, then sobered. What happened, Jim? I didn't have an answer. Just the truth. I don't know. When I got back to the truck, the invoices sat in the passenger seat like quiet passengers. Each one a reminder that the world could rewrite a man's name faster than he could defend it. Over the next week, I called every vendor myself. Some recognized my voice immediately. Others hesitated, as if unsure whether they were speaking to a ghost. Each conversation ended the same way: polite apologies, uncomfortable silences, and the same unspoken message. You don't belong in her world anymore. By Thursday night, I had the total tallied neatly on a yellow pad. I poured another drink and sat on the porch, the night air sharp and clean. $500,000. More than I could afford. Enough to crush my company if I didn't manage the fallout. I thought about calling a lawyer, but something in me resisted. Lawyers fought for money. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about a name, about truth. The next morning, I went to the office early. The walls of Hayes Construction smelled like sawdust and coffee. Honest smells, unpretentious ones. My foreman, Ricky, looked up from his desk. You look like hell, boss, he said. Feel worse, I replied. He glanced at the pile of papers in my hand. What's all that? Debts, I said simply. He whistled low. For what? My daughter's wedding. He blinked, trying to process. Didn't her husband's people pay for that? I smiled faintly. Apparently not. Apparently, her real father is dead. Ricky frowned, uncertain whether I was joking. When he realized I wasn't, he shook his head. That's cold, man. Yeah, I said, folding the papers neatly. But I'm still breathing. He hesitated before asking, what are you going to do? I didn't answer right away. I just stared out the window, watching the early sunlight spill across the lumber yard. The same light that used to make Victoria squint and laugh when she'd visit me after school. Finally, I said, "I'll pay them." "All of them. Everyone." Ricky exhaled slowly, like he was trying to let the madness settle. "Jim, that'll sink you." I nodded. "Maybe. But at least when the dust settles, they'll know one thing." "What's that?" he asked. "That her father kept his word, even after she erased it." That night, I opened my checkbook. The ink glistened under the lamp as I wrote the first one. Then another. Then another. My hand trembled, but I didn't stop. Outside, the wind rose, rustling the old oak in the yard. The sound reminded me of applause, faint, distant, cruel. And in that strange, quiet moment, I understood something I hadn't before. Death wasn't always final. Sometimes it came in the form of silence, paperwork, and the polite erasure of your name from the world you built. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. There's a peculiar calm that follows disaster, a strange, hollow quiet where even anger feels like a luxury. That was the calm that settled over me in the weeks after the invoices arrived. My company account drained with every check I signed. My savings vanished faster than the ink dried. But I didn't stop. Some men fight fire with fire. I fought betrayal with receipts. The first payment went to the vineyard. The owner looked startled when I handed him a cashier's check for the full balance. "Mr. Hayes," he said, taking the envelope like it might explode. "You don't have to do this. We were told the Whitmores have their own story," I said evenly. "This one's mine." He nodded slowly, eyes softening. "You're a good man." "No," I replied. "Just one trying to keep his name from becoming a lie." The days blurred into a steady rhythm. Morning coffee, job site meetings, phone calls to vendors, late nights, writing checks. My foreman, Ricky, tried to talk me out of it more than once. "You're bleeding yourself dry," he warned. "She wouldn't do the same for you." "That's not the point," I said. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Then what is?" "Honor," I said simply. "If I don't have that, what's left?" He didn't argue after that. The florist cried when I walked into her shop with a check. She hugged me before I could protest. "Jim, this isn't right," she said. "You shouldn't have to pay for lies someone else told." "I'm not paying for lies," I told her. "I'm paying for memories I built that day, even if I wasn't welcome at it." She looked at me like she didn't know whether to pity or admire me. I didn't need either. By the end of the month, word had started to spread. Small-town gossip has a way of moving faster than truth, and mine came dressed in both tragedy and dignity. "Did you hear?" people whispered at diners, construction sites, grocery stores. "He's paying every penny of his daughter's wedding, even though she pretended he was dead." Some called it devotion. Others called it madness. I didn't care what they called it. I just kept paying. At night, when I came home, I'd sit in the living room, surrounded by the ghosts of old photographs. Victoria's graduation, her 16th birthday, that camping trip we took when she was 8 and insisted on roasting every marshmallow herself. I thought about all the times I told her, "A Hayes keeps his word." It used to be a lesson. Now it was a curse I couldn't shake. One evening, after sending the final payment to the catering company, I got a call from an old friend, Frank, a retired contractor I'd known for 30 years. He'd heard the rumors. "Jim," he said without preamble, "what the hell are you doing?" "Finishing what I started," I said. "I heard you're clearing $500,000 in debts that ain't yours." "They're mine enough," I said. He chuckled bitterly. "You're letting her destroy you." "No," I replied, staring at the stack of canceled checks on my desk. "I'm showing her what real integrity costs." There was a long silence. Finally, Frank said quietly, "That girl's gonna realize one day what she threw away." "Maybe," I said. "But it's not about that. It's about leaving something behind that can't be rewritten." By mid-December, my accounts were nearly empty. I sold one of my trucks, took out a line of credit on the business, and kept the payroll running by working longer hours myself. The men noticed, but no one said a word. They respected quiet resolve more than speeches. One afternoon, after a long day pouring concrete in freezing wind, I walked into the office to find a small box on my desk. No return address. Inside was a folded note and a photograph. The note read, "We saw what you did for your daughter. The world could use more fathers like you." No signature. Just the photograph, a candid shot from a wedding. Victoria was mid-laugh, her veil caught in the wind, the sunlight turning her hair to gold. For a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to sit on my shoulders to watch fireworks. I didn't know who sent it. Maybe a vendor, maybe someone who'd heard the story online. But I kept it. That night, I placed the photo on my mantle, not as a reminder of betrayal, but of a line between love and sacrifice. The local paper caught wind of the story next. I didn't talk to them. They didn't need to know why. But they wrote it anyway, a column about the father who paid for his daughter's wedding after being declared dead. It spread fast. Some readers called me a saint. Others called me a fool blinded by love. Both were wrong. I was just a man trying to stand upright in the ruins of his own story. Strangers started sending letters, sympathy, admiration, sometimes cash in envelopes I always returned. But one note, written in trembling cursive, stayed with me. "You remind me of my father. He taught me that pride can't buy peace. You've chosen peace, even if it hurts." Peace. The word felt foreign, like something I'd forgotten the meaning of. On Christmas Eve, I locked up the office and walked home through the falling snow. The streets were quiet, the air sharp. The lights from nearby houses glowed warm and soft. Families gathered around fireplaces, children laughing. When I reached my porch, I looked back toward town. Somewhere out there, my daughter was celebrating her first Christmas as a Whitmore. Maybe she was opening gifts beneath a tree taller than my house. Maybe she was pretending again, pretending the man who taught her to ride a bike never existed. But I didn't feel anger anymore, just a strange, tired gratitude that I had loved her enough to lose her. Inside, the heater groaned to life. I poured one last drink and sat in my armchair, the photo from the anonymous sender propped against a lamp. The girl in the picture didn't look cruel, just lost. I raised my glass to her image. "Merry Christmas, kid," I murmured. "You may not remember me, but I'll always remember you." The whiskey burned going down, a quiet fire against the cold. Outside, snow kept falling, soft, steady, relentless. Like forgiveness, if such a thing still existed for men like me. It started with a photo. A florist named Elise, the same woman who cried when I handed her that check, posted it on her shop's Facebook page. A simple snapshot of me standing at her counter, handing over the final payment. She'd written, "This man paid for his daughter's wedding, every last bill, even after she told the world he was dead. Not all heroes wear capes. Some wear work boots." I didn't even know about it until Ricky came storming into the office the next morning, phone in hand, eyes wide. "Your famous boss," he said, tossing it onto my desk. "What are you talking about?" He grinned, half amused, half incredulous. "You're all over the damn internet. They're calling you the ghost father." I frowned and picked up the phone. Elise's post had over 50,000 shares. Someone had turned it into a tweet, then a thread, then a headline. "He paid for his daughter's wedding after being declared dead. Meet Jim Hayes, the father who wouldn't disappear." I scrolled through hundreds of comments, strangers arguing about me like I was an exhibit behind glass. What a man. True integrity still exists. "This guy's daughter doesn't deserve him. Saint or sucker. You decide." A cold knot formed in my stomach. I'd spent months trying to keep my dignity private, and now the world had turned it into a morality play. By noon, local reporters were camped outside my office. One shoved a microphone toward me as I stepped out. "Mr. Hayes, how does it feel to be America's most selfless father?" I blinked under the sudden flash of cameras. "I'm not sure I qualify," I said quietly. Another reporter cut in. "Do you have a message for your daughter?" I hesitated. A dozen answers came to mind, none fit for print. Finally, I said, "Tell her I hope she's happy." That night, the story ran on the evening news. My face, weathered, tired, unshaven, filled living rooms across the state. The anchor's voice was smooth and sympathetic. In a world where loyalty is fading, one father's sacrifice has captured hearts nationwide. They didn't mention the unpaid invoices or the cold phone calls or the assistant who told me I was dead. They told a cleaner story, one that made people feel better about love. I sat in the dark watching it play out, the glow of the TV flickering across the photo of Victoria on the mantel. Somewhere in the city, she was probably seeing the same broadcast. Her name blurred for privacy reasons, but the resemblance unmistakable. The next morning, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, talk shows, podcasts, online magazines, all wanting a piece of the ghost father. Ricky finally unplugged the landline just to get work done. By the third day, I agreed to one interview. Not for fame, not for sympathy, but because if people were going to tell my story, I wanted at least one version of it told right. The reporter, a young woman named Lauren Pierce, met me at the lumber yard. She looked too kind for her job, all notebook and nerves. "Mr. Hayes," she began, "your story has really touched people. Why did you decide to pay those bills?" I thought about lying, about saying something that would sound noble or rehearsed. Instead, I told the truth. "Because they were mine," I said simply. "And because I wanted my daughter to know that some promises don't vanish just because love does." Laura nodded, pen scratching fast. "Are you angry at her?" I considered that for a long moment. "Anger's easy," I said finally. "It burns hot and leaves fast. I'm past that. Sometimes love means letting the truth find its own way home." She smiled faintly. "That's beautiful." "It's honest," I said. "Beauty has nothing to do with it." When the interview aired 2 days later, something strange happened. The tone shifted. People stopped treating me like a tragic relic and started seeing something else, a man who'd kept his dignity in a world that had tried to erase it. Comments poured in by the thousands. Some offered donations. Others shared stories about fathers they'd lost or reconciled with. A few even admitted that it made them call home for the first time in years. But not everyone was celebrating. By the end of the week, the Whitmore family name was trending, and not for charity galas or corporate milestones. The tabloids had found their angle. Heiress's father declared dead, the truth behind the Whitmore wedding. Scandal erupts over family who erased working-class father. The Whitmores' carefully crafted image began to crumble. Sponsors withdrew from Preston's father's business ventures. The glossy socialites, who once smiled in their photographs, suddenly went silent. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt tired. One evening, as I locked up the office, Ricky said quietly, "Looks like the truth's finally catching up, huh?" "Truth doesn't chase," I told him. "It just waits for people to trip over it." A week later, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No return address, again. Inside was a single sheet of thick stationery embossed with a Whitmore family crest. It read, "Cease and desist from further public commentary regarding our family. Your continued actions have caused measurable reputational harm. Failure to comply may result in legal action." I laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from a place too deep to sound joyful. I hadn't said a word against them. The truth had done that all on its own. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in the drawer beside the photo of Victoria. If the Whitmores thought they could silence the story, they didn't understand that it wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who'd ever been forgotten by the people they loved. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, the cool air biting against my hands. Across the street, the neighbors' kids were hanging Christmas lights, laughing as the bulbs flickered to life. I thought about Victoria, about whether she still believed her new name could protect her from her old one. Maybe she still told people her father was gone. But now, the world knew otherwise. And for the first time since the wedding, I didn't feel erased. I wasn't dead. I wasn't invisible. I was a man standing in the wreckage of his story, still breathing, still upright. And somewhere out there, the truth was finally doing what it always does when it's given enough time, coming home. She came on a Tuesday morning. No warning. No call ahead. No dad. Just the sound of polished heels echoing through the hall outside my office, followed by the click of the door handle turning. When I looked up, she was standing there, Victoria. Even after all the months of headlines and silence, I knew that silhouette in an instant. The tailored gray suit, the dark hair pinned back, the faint trace of perfume that hadn't changed since she was a teenager. But the rest of her, the posture, the guarded eyes, the coolness in her face, that belonged to someone else now. Two men in suits followed behind her, carrying briefcases. Lawyers. Of course. "Mr. Hayes," she said evenly, as if I were a stranger she'd been assigned to meet. My pen stopped mid-signature. I looked at her for a long moment before answering. "I used to be Dad." She didn't flinch. "This isn't a personal visit." Clearly. I nodded toward the chairs. "Have a seat, all of you." The lawyers remained standing, stiff as mannequins. She sat, crossing her legs, placing a folder on my desk with precise care, like someone handling evidence. "You've caused a great deal of damage," she began. I raised an eyebrow. "To who?" "To me," she said sharply. "To my husband. To my reputation." I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands. "I haven't said a single word about you, Victoria." "Maybe not directly," she snapped, "but you didn't have to. That interview, those checks, you knew exactly how it would look." "How it would look?" I repeated, the words heavy. "You mean how it would look for the truth to show its face?" Her eyes narrowed. "You've humiliated me publicly." "No," I said softly, sliding open a drawer and pulling out a stack of receipts, the originals from every payment I'd made. I placed them on the desk between us. "You did that when you buried me." Her jaw tightened. "You don't understand how complicated things were. Preston's family wanted a cleaner story," I finished. I read the script. One of the lawyers cleared his throat. "Mr. Hayes, this meeting is not for emotional discussion. We're here to address reputational damages, possible defamation." I cut him off. "Defamation? You declared me dead. How do you defame a ghost?" Silence. Even her lawyers didn't know where to look. I picked up one of the receipts and held it between my fingers. "You know what this is, Victoria? This is the bill for the flowers you posed beside in every photograph. The ones you said were from his family. That's on me. Every petal, every bloom. Paid in full." "I didn't ask you to." "You didn't have to. That's what parents do. We pay for things we never get thanked for." She looked away, her composure cracking for the briefest moment. "You're using this to make me look ungrateful." "No," I said, voice steady. "I'm using it to remind you who built your fairy tale." Her eyes glistened, but she blinked it away before the tears could fall. She glanced at the lawyers, as if searching for an exit. When she finally spoke again, her voice was lower. "You could have called me. Before all this." "I did," I said. "You disconnected your number. I called your house. They told me I was dead." The words landed between us like a stone dropped in water, ripples of shame spreading outward. She swallowed hard, looking down at her manicured hands. For a moment, she looked small again, like the girl who used to sit on my shoulders to watch parades. Then she straightened. "What do you want from me, Dad?" There it was, the word. Fragile, almost reluctant, but there. I exhaled slowly. "Nothing," I said. "Not money, not apologies, not some grand gesture. Just remembrance. A line in your story that says I existed." Her face softened, and for a second I thought she might actually understand. But then one of the lawyers whispered something in her ear, and the mask slid back into place. "I can't undo what's already been said," she murmured. "I'm not asking you to," I replied. "Just stop pretending I never mattered." She rose to her feet, smoothing her skirt. "You've made your point." "I don't think I have," I said, standing too. "Because if I had, you'd still be sitting." Her chin lifted. "I'm not here for forgiveness, Dad." "Good," I said. "Because I'm not handing it out like candy." That one hit her. I saw it in the tremor at the corner of her mouth. She turned toward the door, then paused. Her eyes fell on the check resting atop the pile of receipts, the last one, still waiting for my signature. "What's that?" she asked. "The final payment," I said. "The string quartet." Her lips parted as if to say something, but she didn't. She just watched as I picked up the pen and signed it. The scratch of ink on paper filled the silence. "There," I said, sliding it into an envelope. "Now every debt tied to your wedding is settled." She blinked hard, trying to hide the way her breath caught. Why keep doing this? After everything. I looked her straight in the eye. Because one day you'll look in the mirror and wonder where all the good men went. And I want you to remember that your father was one of them. Her mouth quivered, pride fighting with regret. Then she turned sharply, signaling to her lawyers. They followed her out without a word. When the door shut behind them, the office fell silent again. The faint hum of machinery in the yard drifted through the window. I sat back down, staring at the empty space where she'd stood. For the first time in months, I didn't feel angry. I just felt old. On my desk, beside the stack of receipts, her perfume lingered, faint, expensive, familiar. I closed my eyes, letting it fade. Ricky poked his head in a few minutes later. Was that who I think it was? Yeah, I said quietly. He hesitated. How'd it go? I looked at the sign check, still drying under the light. About as well as any funeral between the living can. He nodded slowly, then left me alone. I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the dusty yard, the machines, the piles of lumber waiting to be shaped into something lasting. Things built with hands, not words. And as the day slipped into evening, one thought stayed with me, a truth sharper than any pain she could have given me. Sometimes remembrance isn't about being loved again. It's about refusing to vanish quietly. It took less than 2 months for the Whitmore's empire to crumble. Reputation, I learned, doesn't die slowly. It collapses, suddenly and loudly, like a mansion built on sand. The first crack appeared when the Herald ran a front-page story titled, "The Family Who Buried the Living." They'd obtained documents, contracts, emails, payment confirmations. Someone, maybe a sympathetic insider, had leaked everything. The article detailed how the Whitmores used my company's accounts to fund their son's wedding, how my signature was on every invoice, and how their estate staff had recorded me as deceased to avoid responsibility. It wasn't just gossip anymore. It was evidence. By noon, the Whitmores' phone lines were flooded with calls from journalists and furious investors. By evening, every major news outlet was covering it. Phrases like ethical misconduct and fraudulent misrepresentation were being tossed around. I didn't celebrate. I just watched. When the mighty fall, the noise comes from everyone else. The people who once smiled, nodded, and praised them now clutched their pearls and pretended they'd never known the name. Preston Whitmore III, Victoria's husband, went first. His father, Charles Sr., reportedly called him a liability during a shareholders' meeting. Investors withdrew millions overnight. The family's luxury brand lost half its board within a week. By the end of that week, Preston's name had become synonymous with scandal, not wealth. Victoria's, too. I caught glimpses of her in the tabloids, her face hidden under wide-brimmed hats, her hand shielding her from cameras. Headlines followed her everywhere. Socialite's secret past exposed. Heiress lied about father's death. The ghost bride of Belhist. The same media that once adored her now devoured her. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I just felt sick. One evening, I came home from work to find the answering machine blinking red again. I pressed play. Margaret's voice filled the room, thin, nervous. "Jim, I know you've seen the news. She's not handling it well. Preston's moved out. His family's frozen her accounts. She doesn't have anyone to talk to." Her voice trembled on the next words. "Please don't make it worse. She's paying for what she did." I didn't delete the message. I didn't call back either. That night, I sat by the window with the lights off, watching the snow drift under the street lamps. I tried to picture Victoria, alone in some mansion, the silence pressing down like a punishment. The girl who once filled every room she entered, now trapped in a house built for appearances, not love. It didn't feel like justice. It felt like rot. The next morning, the local newspaper tried to reach me for comment. I told them nothing. The less I said, the clearer the truth sounded. Still, word traveled. Neighbors stopped me in grocery aisles, old colleagues shook my hand. Strangers sent letters thanking me for standing for what's right. But right didn't feel as solid as they thought. One day, Ricky came into my office, holding his phone. "Boss," he said quietly, "you might want to see this." It was a video, grainy, probably taken by some paparazzi. Victoria stood outside a courthouse, surrounded by reporters. Her hair was messy, her face pale. "Mrs. Whitmore," a journalist shouted, "is it true your husband's family has filed for annulment?" She hesitated, blinking against the flashes. "We're working through things privately." "Did you really tell people your father was dead?" another voice asked. She froze. The microphones crowded closer. "Finally," she said, almost whispering, "I made mistakes." And then quietly, "Big ones." The clip ended there. I handed the phone back. "Turn it off," I said. Ricky nodded, pocketing it. "You okay?" I stared at the half-finished coffee on my desk. I don't think okay's the right word anymore. A week later, Margaret showed up at my house. I hadn't seen her in years, not since the divorce papers were signed, and she drove off with half the furniture. She looked older, but her eyes, still that sharp blue that could cut through pretense, hadn't changed. "Don't worry," she said when I opened the door. "I'm not here to fight." "I wasn't worried," I said, stepping aside. She came in, glanced around the house. "You kept it the same." Didn't see a reason to change it. We sat in the living room, awkward and quiet. She was the first to speak. "Victoria's not doing well." "I heard. She's been staying in a hotel. Preston's family made it clear she's no longer welcome at the estate. He's already filed." I nodded slowly. "So that's it then." "She called me last night," Margaret said softly. "She cried for an hour. Said she doesn't know who she is anymore." Maybe that's the first honest thing she said in years. Margaret sighed. "Jim, she's still your daughter." "Yeah," I said. "And that's why I'm not running to save her right now." Margaret studied me for a long moment. "You always did believe pain was the best teacher. It's the only one that sticks." She stood, pulling her coat tight. "You know, she might still come back to you. Maybe not today, but eventually." I didn't answer. She left quietly, and the door clicked shut behind her like punctuation. That night, I walked through the house and stopped by Victoria's old room. The air smelled faintly of dust and faded lilac. Her photo still sat on the shelf, the one from a camping trip, where she was grinning, covered in dirt, holding a stick like it was a sword. I smiled despite myself. "You were fearless then," I whispered. The silence didn't answer, but something inside me softened. Maybe Margaret was right. Maybe she would come back one day. But it would have to be her choice. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering dry leaves across the porch. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang, soft, mournful, steady. The Whitmores were falling, but that wasn't my victory to celebrate. All I'd ever wanted was truth. And now, stripped bare of glamour and lies, truth was all any of us had left. For the first time in a long while, I turned off the lights, sat down, and let the quiet come without fighting it. Because for once, the silence didn't feel like erasure. It felt like waiting. The phone rang after midnight. At first, I thought it was a wrong number. Hardly anyone called me that late, and those who did usually wanted something I couldn't give. The sound startled me awake, sharp, insistent, echoing through the quiet of the house. When I picked it up, I didn't say hello, just waited. Then a trembling voice filled the line. "Dad." For a second, I couldn't speak. The word hung there, raw and unfamiliar after so long. It had been years since she'd said it, maybe since before the wedding. "Victoria," I said finally, my voice rough. There was a shaky breath on the other end, the sound of someone trying not to cry. "I didn't know if you'd answer." "I almost didn't," I admitted. "But here we are." A long silence followed. I could hear faint street noise behind her, cars passing, a door closing, maybe the hum of a motel air conditioner. "I don't know where else to go," she said finally. "Everyone's gone, Dad. Preston's family, my friends, they all disappeared the second the money did." I leaned against the wall, eyes fixed on the shadows stretching across the floor. "That's how you find out who's real," I said quietly. "When the applause stops." "I thought I was being strong," she said, her voice cracking. "I thought if I could become one of them, I'd never feel small again. I told myself it was just a story, that changing my name, my background, pretending it didn't mean I didn't love you." "But it did," I said softly. "Every time you erased me, it did." She didn't argue. I could hear her breathing, short, uneven. I thought pretending made me stronger, she whispered. Now I can't even recognize myself. I look in the mirror and I see someone I don't trust. Her honesty cut deeper than any of the lies that came before it. I sat down, the weight of everything she wasn't saying pressing through the line. You know, I said, you spent years trying to scrub the dirt off your life. But dirt's where things grow. You can't build anything real on marble and glass. I know, she whispered. I see that now. Her voice broke. I ruined everything. You didn't deserve what I did. I closed my eyes. No, I didn't. But you did it anyway. There was a long pause. Do you hate me? She asked. No, I said. Hate's too simple. I've been angry, hurt, proud, heartbroken. But hate? No. That'd be easier. She let out a breath that sounded almost like relief, and then almost like grief. I wish I could go back. You can't, I said gently. No one can. But you can stop running from the truth. That's a start. I could hear her sniffle. I don't even know what to do next. Then do nothing, I said. Sit with it. Let it hurt. Don't cover it up or dress it in excuses. The only way through shame is to feel every inch of it. She didn't answer right away. I imagined her sitting alone in some dim hotel room, still wearing the armor she'd built for herself, makeup smudged, shoulders trembling under the weight of her own choices. After a long silence, she said, You always sound so calm. How do you do that? Because I've already lived through the worst part, I said. Losing you once. Everything after that is just quiet. That seemed to break her. I could hear the sobs she tried to swallow, the way she covered the phone to hide them and failed. I don't deserve your forgiveness, she whispered. I stared at the blank wall across from me, the words heavy in my chest. Maybe not, I said. But forgiveness isn't something you earn. It's something you grow into. She went quiet again. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Would you ever want to see me again? I didn't answer immediately. I could feel her waiting, holding her breath on the other end. When you're ready to stop pretending, I said, you'll know where to find me. There was a soft sound, like a tear landing on paper. And then silence. Okay, she said finally. I'll try. Don't try, I said. Just be honest. That's harder. She gave a small, broken laugh, the first real sound of life I'd heard from her in years. I don't know if I remember how. You will, I said. Truth has a way of teaching fast. Neither of us spoke for a while after that. The line hummed softly, filled with all the words we'd never said when we still had the chance. Finally, she whispered, Good night, Dad. I felt something tighten in my chest, a kind of ache I hadn't realized I'd missed. Good night, kid. When I hung up, the house felt heavier than before, but in a different way, not empty, just waiting. The silence didn't sting. It felt alive again. I went to her old room, opened the door, and stood in the doorway. The air smelled the same, faint lilac, old paper, and something warmer, something that might have been hope. I turned off the hallway light and whispered into the dark, she called. The words hung there, simple and true. Then, for the first time in years, I slept, not soundly but honestly. The first time I saw her again, she wasn't the woman from the wedding photos. It was early spring, gray clouds hanging low over the construction site, the smell of wet cement mixing with dust and diesel. I was checking measurements near the foundation when a shadow fell across the gravel, beside me. I turned, and there she was. Victoria stood at the edge of a lot, hands buried in the pockets of a worn jacket. Her hair was tied back, no makeup, dark circles under her eyes. She looked smaller, thinner, and, most surprising of all, unarmed. No arrogance, no entourage. Just my daughter, stripped of the world she'd built. Morning, she said quietly, like she wasn't sure she had the right to speak first. I nodded once, not trusting my voice. I called, she added. I know, I said. I figured you'd show up when you were ready. She managed a fragile smile. Guess I'm ready. I looked her over, not as the man who'd raised her, but as the employer I'd become by habit. What are you here for, Victoria? She hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. A job. That caught me off guard. A job, I repeated. Yes. Not charity. Not pity. I need to start over. and I don't know where else to begin." The men nearby slowed their work, pretending not to listen. Even the foreman, Ricky, shot me a look that said, "You hearing this?" I wiped my hands on my jeans. "You know this isn't an office, right? It's not some place for polished shoes and soft hands." "I'm not afraid of work," she said quickly. "I'm afraid of wasting another year pretending." That line hit harder than she realized. I studied her for a moment, then nodded toward the storage shed. "There's a broom by the entrance. The cleanup crew starts in 10 minutes. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't argue. She just nodded, walked across the muddy ground, and grabbed the broom. Ricky leaned in close. "You serious, boss?" "Dead serious," I said. "She'll learn faster with a broom than with an apology." By noon, her shoes were soaked, her hair coming loose, and her hands red from blisters she hadn't earned since childhood. She worked quietly, sweeping dust and debris into piles, hauling scrap wood to the dumpster. The men didn't go easy on her, not out of cruelty, but because no one wanted to insult her by treating her different. When lunch came, she sat apart from the others on a stack of pallets, eating from a brown paper bag. I watched from a distance as Ricky walked over and offered her half his sandwich. She hesitated, then took it, smiling shyly. That smile, small, tired, real, did something to me. Later, she came to my trailer, knocking gently on the door. "I finished the west side," she said. Her voice was hoarse from the dust. I nodded. "Good. Tomorrow, you'll help load materials." "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not turning me away." I shrugged. Everyone deserves a chance to rebuild, especially if they know what it means to lose everything first. She bit her lip, trying not to cry. "I'm not here to make you forgive me." "I know," I said. "And that's why you're still here." Days turned into weeks. Victoria showed up every morning at 7 sharp. She wore the same work boots, the same jacket, and by the second week, she'd stopped flinching at the sound of heavy machinery. She worked hard, not perfectly but honestly. The gossip faded. At first, the crew had whispered about her, the fallen socialite, the girl from the headlines. But hard work has a way of silencing pity. When they saw her bleeding hands and sweat-streaked face, they stopped seeing a scandal and started seeing a laborer. One Friday afternoon, as we packed up for the day, Ricky grinned and said, "She's got guts, boss." Didn't think she'd last a week. "She's tougher than she looks," I said. He smirked. "Apple doesn't fall far, huh?" I didn't answer. But for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the sting in that phrase. One evening, after everyone had gone, I found Victoria sitting on a half-finished wall, watching the sunset. Her hands were covered in dirt, her face smudged, but she looked peaceful. "Mind if I join you?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "It's your wall." I sat beside her, stretching my sore legs. The sky burned gold and red over the frame of what would soon be a new office complex. "You used to hate construction sites," I said. "I used to hate a lot of things I didn't understand," she replied. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind. "Do you ever think about them?" I asked finally. "The Whitmores." She nodded slowly. "Sometimes. But it feels like remembering a bad dream. Like someone else lived it. Maybe that's a good thing." She smiled faintly. "Maybe. I just wish I'd figured out sooner that pretending to be perfect is the fastest way to break yourself." I looked at her, really looked at her. The dirt under her nails, the small scar on her wrist from a day's work, the quiet resolve in her eyes. She wasn't running anymore. "You're learning," I said. "From the best," she said softly. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of sawdust and oil, the scent of work, of rebuilding. "Dad," she said suddenly. "Yeah. Thank you for still being here." I didn't trust my voice enough to answer, so I just nodded. For the first time in years, I didn't see the daughter who'd betrayed me. I saw the girl who used to run barefoot through my yard, hands outstretched, certain the world was good because her father said it was. And maybe, just maybe, she was learning to believe that again. Summer came slow that year. The mornings stretched longer, warmer, softer. The hum of machinery started before sunrise, the same as always, but there was a new rhythm on site, a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. Victoria had settled into the crew like she'd always belonged there. No one called her Miss Whitmore anymore. She was just Vic, the woman who showed up early, stayed late, and carried her weight. I'd catch glimpses of her in small moments, sharing coffee from the same thermos as the laborers, laughing at Ricky's bad jokes, hauling lumber across the yard without complaint. Every time I saw her, I felt something loosen inside me, the kind of pride that didn't need to announce itself. One evening, the heat finally broke, and a soft wind rolled through the valley. The crew clocked out, leaving the site quiet except for the low hum of cicadas. I stayed behind to check the scaffolding one last time. When I turned around, Victoria was sitting on the edge of a newly finished wall, her boots dangling over the drop. The sunset stretched across the sky, orange bleeding into purple. It lit her face like a photograph I didn't want to lose. "Long day," I said, walking over. "They're all long," she replied, smiling. "That's the point, right?" I sat beside her, the concrete still warm beneath us. For a while, we just watched the horizon, saying nothing. Finally, she broke the silence. "You know what's strange? I used to think your world was small. I thought building houses and offices was just labor, a thing people did until something better came along. And now?" I asked. She looked down at her hands, the calluses faint but real. "Now I think it's the only world built to last." I couldn't help but smile. "That's what I've been trying to tell you your whole life." "I wasn't listening," she said softly. "Most kids don't. The trick is coming back when you're ready to hear it." She turned toward me, the evening light catching the faint lines of exhaustion on her face. But beneath them was something new: peace. "I used to think inheritance was about money," she said. "Turns out it's about lessons that take years to understand." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Speaking of inheritance," I said, handing it to her. She unfolded it slowly. It was a paycheck, her name printed neatly at the top, the company logo stamped in the corner. "You're officially on payroll," I said. "You earned that one fair and square." Her eyes shimmered. "You didn't have to." "I did," I said, cutting her off gently. "Because you worked for it. Because you showed up. You don't inherit respect, Vic. You build it." She looked down at the check, her fingers tracing her own name like she was seeing it for the first time. Then she looked back at me. "Dad," she said quietly, voice trembling. "I don't deserve." "Stop," I said softly. "Deserve's got nothing to do with it. You learned what kind of woman you are. That's worth more than anything you lost." She blinked, and a tear slid down her cheek. "I don't think I've called you that in years." "What, Dad?" I smiled faintly. "Well, it still sounds right." For a while, neither of us spoke. The sky darkened, the first stars appearing above the cranes and half-built beams. I thought about all the things I'd built over the years, walls, homes, offices, and how none of them compared to this quiet moment of rebuilding something invisible but lasting. She broke the silence again. "Do you ever think about Mom?" "Sometimes," I said. "Mostly when it rains." She said you'd never forgive me. I looked out at the half-finished building, the steel frame glowing under the last bit of sunlight. "Forgiveness isn't something you say," I told her. "It's something you prove, day by day." She nodded, looking down at her paycheck again. "I want to keep proving it. Then keep showing up," I said. "That's all it takes." A breeze picked up, carrying the smell of concrete and wildflowers from the edge of the lot. She tucked the paycheck carefully into her jacket pocket and turned to me. "You think you'll ever retire?" she asked. "Retire?" I chuckled. "And let someone else take the credit for my mistakes." She laughed, a full, bright sound that echoed across the empty site. I hadn't heard that laugh since she was a teenager. It filled the air like a promise. As the last light faded, I stood and offered her my hand. "Come on," I said. "Let's head home." She took it, not out of need, but as a gesture of something rebuilt between us. Her grip was firm, steady. We walked together toward the truck, the gravel crunching under our boots. Behind us, the building stood half-finished, a skeleton of steel and concrete silhouetted against the fading sky. But for the first time, I saw it not as a project, but as a monument, proof that broken things could be built again. Before getting in the truck, She turned back toward the site. You'll have to name it, you know. I smiled. Already did. She raised an eyebrow. Yeah? What's it called? Hayes and Daughter. She froze, blinking fast. You're serious? Dead serious, I said. Figured it was time the name meant something again. She laughed through her tears, shaking her head. You really think anyone's gonna hire a company with a story like ours? I looked up at the structure one last time. If they don't, I said, we'll build our own damn future. The sun dipped behind the hill, and the first lights flickered on in town below. For the first time in years, I felt something I'd thought I'd lost for good. Not pride, not victory. Just peace. The kind that comes when the pieces finally fit again, rough edges and all. As we drove away, I caught her reflection in the side mirror, tired, smiling, alive. And I realized that maybe, after everything, this was the real inheritance. Not money, not forgiveness, but the quiet strength to begin again. A year later, the building was finished. It wasn't the biggest project I'd ever done, or the most expensive, but it was the one that meant the most. The new Hayes and Daughter office stood on the edge of town, a modest structure of brick and glass that caught the morning light like it had something to say. The nameplate by the entrance gleamed. Hayes and Daughter Construction. Founded 1989. Rebuilt 2024. People smiled when they saw it. Some even stopped to take pictures, not because it was beautiful, but because it stood for something you couldn't quite photograph. Endurance. That morning, we held a small opening ceremony. No press, no speeches, no champagne. Just the crew, a few close friends, and Victoria. She wore jeans, a work shirt, and a hard hat with a smudge of paint on it. Her hands were calloused, her nails short, her face tanned from months in the sun. But her eyes, steady, calm, honest, those were new. When she walked up beside me, the men parted instinctively. The foreman handed her the last trowel, and she knelt to lay the final stone near the building's entrance. Her movements were careful, deliberate, the kind that comes when you understand what permanence really costs. As she pressed it into place, she smiled faintly. Feels like I'm finally putting something back instead of taking it away. I nodded. That's how rebuilding works. One honest piece at a time. When she stood, I saw the faint shimmer in her eyes before she blinked it away. Mom's coming by later, she said. She said she wants to see it. I smiled at that. Didn't think she'd show her face again. She said she wanted to see what forgiveness looks like when it's made of brick. I chuckled. Tell her it's heavier than she thinks. The rest of the day moved slowly. The crew cleaned up, the last of the equipment was packed, and one by one the men drifted off toward their trucks. By evening, the site was quiet again, just the two of us, standing before what we'd built. Victoria took off her hard hat and looked up at the sign. You know, she said softly, I used to think names didn't matter, that you could just change them, make new ones, and start over. And now, she smiled. Now I think they're anchors. They hold you steady if you don't run from them. The wind tugged at her hair. She turned toward me. I don't know if I ever really said it, but thank you. For what? For not giving up on me. For making me face myself. I looked at her for a long moment. You did that on your own. I just left the light on. She laughed quietly, wiping a bit of dirt from her cheek. You always did have a way of making everything sound simpler than it was. Simple doesn't mean easy, I said. No, she agreed. It doesn't. That evening, we sat out front, watching the street lights flicker on one by one. The world moved on, trucks rumbled past. The scent of rain carried through the air. You ever think about what's next? She asked. Always. For you, I mean. I thought about it. Maybe less building for others, more teaching for you. You've got the patience for it now. She smiled. And what about you? Me? I'll keep showing up until my hands give out. Then maybe I'll finally take that fishing trip I've been promising myself since '09. She laughed softly. You'd last half a day before you started checking the dock for repairs. Probably, I admitted. Silence settled between us. Not the uneasy kind that used to hang in our conversations, but a gentle one. The kind that meant nothing was left unsaid. After a while, she spoke again. Do you ever regret paying for that wedding? I looked out at the street. the glow of the office windows reflecting in the puddles. No, I said. It bought me the truth. And eventually it brought me here. She nodded slowly. I think I finally understand what you meant when you said integrity costs. It's the only bill worth paying twice, I said. She smiled. And you did. The rain started just after sunset, soft at first, then steady. We didn't move. The smell of wet asphalt and concrete filled the air. The new building glistened under the streetlights, its walls darkened by the rain, solid and real. Victoria leaned her head on my shoulder, just for a moment, the way she used to when she was a child and the world still made sense. Dad, she said quietly. Yeah. Do you think we'll ever stop rebuilding? I looked out at the rain, at the reflection of our names shining on the glass. I hope not, I said. That's what keeps us alive. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. Then I think we'll be just fine. Later that night, after she left, I locked up the office and walked back to the foundation, the same place she'd laid that last stone. The rain had eased to a drizzle, and moonlight broke through the clouds, catching the wet surface and making it shine. I knelt and ran my fingers along the line of bricks, feeling the rough edges beneath my skin. It wasn't perfect. There were cracks, uneven lines, places where the mortar had settled too thick. But it stood firm, honest, true. And maybe that was all life ever needed to be. I stood, looked up at the nameplate one last time, and whispered, "You did good, kid." The rain fell harder, but I didn't move. I just stood there in it, letting it wash over me, letting the world feel clean again. For years, I believed that legacy meant leaving something behind. But as I watched the water slide down the walls we'd built together, I realized I'd been wrong. Legacy isn't what you leave. It's what stays standing after you've been forgiven.